René was called Dennis when I first met him because, as I heard it, the school he was forced to attend told him that René was a girl's name and that he should be called Dennis. So I think probably even in programs for a few years, when he was dancing with us, he was probably listed as René Highway. I mean, that's sort of how I met him. And of course, René suits him much, much more. I mean, he was uniquely beautiful inside and out. And it took me a long time to realize that we were not seeing the same world.
His grandfather had been a spiritual man. I hesitate to use the word shaman but I will just say that he was a spiritual man. And René certainly inherited that sensibility from his grandfather and carried that into all that he did, including dance. And so there was an otherworldly quality to the way he approached it. Certainly he walked very lightly on this planet. You know, you could feel that his spirit was light and engaged as much with the stars in a way as he was with the earth, you know.
You couldn't help but identify with René on stage. He was so honest in everything he did. It made it easy for people to cross the footlights.
His thoughts about dance were in that world to communicate animal life or spiritual life was not something that he over-intellectualized about, it just was. So that was significantly different from the other dancers and choreographers that I knew. So in that sense, he brought what we might recognize as sort of a First Nations macro picture of movement and what stories we tell through movement. But René also recognized that he was useful and that his being a gorgeous young Native man gave him this, choreographers love to use him to represent the young warrior or the young spiritual seeker or, you know, indigenous mythology that people love to place and project on Native artists. And that happened. You know, René was groundbreaking. So his career was groundbreaking. So he was the first, right? And when you're the first, I'm not going to say you pay a cost for it, but it means that the way you're seen, the way people project on you is very specific.
He was there for everyone. There were no barriers socially for him. If people were honest and friendly, he was right there, ready to communicate, so opposite to today. The boundaries that might have existed around his sense of himself were never aggressive and never uncomfortable. You just felt that he had a private sense of himself that he maintained always.
It was thrilling for René to become a choreographer and a director. His collaboration with Thompson was deep and powerful. And in some ways, Thompson's writing for René and for Billy, their nephew, helped Thompson sort of explode as a writer because he was exploring language in the same kind of way that René was exploring movement. And there was such simpatico between them in terms of what they were looking to express. One of the things that he talked about later in his life was the idea that that he would be able to give back and go north and start a school for young Native folks coming up. And we talked about where that might be and when that could happen, and it would be a summer program. And we talked about it, and I know that it was very important for him to be able to give kids that didn't have his opportunities, and we're seeing it over and over again how the young generation back on the reserves and in the home territories are not getting the support. And I think about the loss of René and what it could have meant to young Indigenous artists coming up to have had his leadership. And it's a terrible loss.
I remember visiting him in the hospital near the end, and the most extraordinary experience, and I'll never forget it, because the room had been transformed completely, and there were objects floating in space, and the daylight had been blocked out, and it was full of sounds and images. It had become a completely magical environment. It was already another place, and I've never seen anything like that in my life, and it was extraordinary. It was a magical place to be.
There was a great deal of grief for so many of us in losing him. It was just heartbreaking on so many levels. But you know, as I learned to release him and stop thinking of it personally, and to imagine that he's helping turn the big wheels now, you know, in some magical way that we can't actually understand. You know, that's the way I've chosen to make sense of his passing. And it's sort of beautiful because it feels to me like it's a continuation of the work he was doing when he was here on the planet, you know.